Hey, what's up, guys? So today I wanted to talk about the science behind the principle of exercise variation and specifically how we should incorporate it into our training to improve our progress in terms of building strength and gaining muscle. So, exercise variation has commonly been referred to as muscle confusion or shocking the muscle in mainstream media. So even though both of these terms sound extremely bro sciencey, they do have some relevance to what the principle of variation is actually trying to accomplish. What I have filming right here is just my second week of my mesocycle, the second mesocycle of this hypertrophy program, my first push day. So I have the exercises and the rep scheme and proximity to failure listed below, so you guys can look at that if you want. But going back to variation, exercise variation is defined as the manipulation of training variables to prevent injury and staleness in order to magnify long-term adaptive responses to training. So we use variation in training primarily to prevent the body from accommodating too quickly to the stimulus our training is providing, which will inevitably result in a rate of progress in the gym becoming slower and more monotonous, which is obviously we don't want to have that happen. We want to make as much progress as we can possible and avoid these plateaus. So I was going through a few studies and I saw one peer-reviewed study published in the National Strength and Conditioning Association looked at 15 different studies on the effect of periodizing training and incorporating the principle of variation into different programs. And these authors actually found that out of 13 of 15 of these studies, that a superior training outcome was found from incorporating variation into programming. In addition, another peer-reviewed paper in 2012 by John Kiley stated that due to complicating logical constraints, experimental designs have compared interventions regularly varying training parameters with interventions with minimal or no variation. Accordingly, what such studies have demonstrated is that variation is a critical aspect of effective training. So it's pretty clear that variation is something that we should all have in our training. It's definitely a part of the equation for long-term progress. So a big limiting factor in our training and why we want to incorporate variation into our training is the concept of adaptive resistance. So adaptive resistance is basically the body's slowing ability to adapt to a stimulus that it encounters. So adaptive resistance is a perfect example of what is a negative feedback loop. So something that my physiology professors used that's commonly as an example of this is, when you're hungry. So generally, the more food that you eat, the less hungry we will become. We all know that. So the same principle holds true for our bodies when we weight train. The more that we perform a certain exercise, the more resilient our body becomes to making further adaptations due to adaptive resistance. The more you perform strength training, the less effective strength training will become, and the more that you perform hypertrophy training, the less effective hypertrophy training will become, and so on and so forth. So the adaptive response of training dampens with continued exposure to the same stimulus. It is important, however, that we balance this principle with the principles of directed adaptation and specificity. A good example of this would be squatting with low reps in the 4 to 6 rep range more often to increase general strength adaptations. That's a very good example of the principles of direct adaptation and specificity. It's important, however, to make sure that we do not overdo this principle of variation, because then we will violate these principles of direct adaptation, and you won't see the desired progress that you want to have. And so how I personally will avoid this issue, what I'm doing right now, is that for each 4 to 6 week mesocycle I program, I choose sets of exercises for that period of training and do not change them after I deload and begin a new mesocycle. I found that programming this way just ensures that my clients and I are still properly adhering to the principles of directed adaptation and specificity, while also correctly incorporating the principle of variation to avoid these negative effects of adaptive resistance that come about with weight training. Exercise variation also helps improve hypertrophy outcomes. For example, different exercises generally tend to target muscle fibers in different ways than other exercise. So when we're looking at the quads, for example, a lunge might affect a certain part of your quad in a different way than double step-ups would. Basically, having variation will ensure that you're able to consistently increase volume on the desired musculature. You want to have that stimulus in order to avoid adaptive resistance and overreaching that specific musculature used in a particular movement, both of which will hinder our ability to make more progress in the gym. Likewise, exercise variation will also improve neural strength due to the novel stimulus it will provide, that is necessary to implement in our training to make continued progress over time. So for example, looking at my bench press, my triceps are a weak point in the press and are always a limiting factor of me being able to complete a rep. Like, it's a rock shot off my chest, but the lockout is just terrible. So a good way for me to combat this is to focus one mesocycle on close grip bench press in order to improve my tricep strength and perform that, and by also performing an exercise that is specific to increasing my bench press. And that's why, for this mesocycle, I'm actually omitting regular bench press entirely and just focusing on close grip bench press. And so because I'll be working on my weak point, this will help me be able to make more progress, hopefully, when I return to my normal grip bench press again, because I have addressed that weakness and spent a good amount of time on improving. Another really overlooked part of variation, why we want to have it, is to maintain connective tissue integrity. So when we perform the same exercises over and over again, it happens along the same lines of compression and tension, and this tends to lead to overuse injuries in the gym, such as tendonitis. And so introducing new exercises each mesocycle introduces new lines of compression and tension, so that we can train hard and avoid these injuries in the long term. So the different ways that I incorporate the principle of variation into programming is by using different RPEs or intensities from different training block weeks. And generally, I'll titrate from like RPE 6 of 7 to like an RPE of 9 or 10 on an overreaching week, which will always be the last week of training before a deload. This will allow for continued progress while also managing fatigue. And another way is by using different exercise selections. So a study published in 2014 concluded that changes in exercises are more efficient than loading schemes to improve muscle strength. So therefore, I would speculate that from this, exercise variation is probably the most powerful form of variation we have in our arsenal. So I kind of already touched on this before, but how I do this is I will choose, and I recommend that you do this, is to choose a specific set of exercises for each muscle group for that period of training, and don't change those exercises until you do deload and begin a new mesocycle. And another and final way to incorporate the principle of variation in training is by using different tempos or velocities in programming, such as for performing pauses like a pause squat, pause bench press, pause deadlift. You get the picture. Slower eccentrics and as well as concentrics. This will also introduce a novel stimulus and allow for further training progression. So, I've been really using these principles more in my training blocks. And I have changed things up, and I can definitely say, it's also nice from a perspective of staleness and not getting bored with training. Like, training should be fun, and sometimes doing the same exercises over and over again kind of tend to get a little bit more redundant. That's basically all the science behind exercise variation. So I would definitely recommend that you guys incorporate this in your programming as you can. If you guys are interested in custom programming or coaching from me, just click the link in my bio. The link in the description box below, and I'll take you to my coaching page. And I just want to thank you guys for watching the video. If you guys like the video, please make sure to give it a like and thumbs up and share it with your friend. So thanks, guys.